The war that would one day be called Robert's Rebellion had not yet begun when Prince Rhaegar Targaryen made a strange decision. In the dark shadows of Summerhall's ruins, he called Lord Rickard Stark to him during a rare gathering of lords. The prince spoke of dreams and destiny, of a song of ice and fire that needed to be sung together. And so a pact was made in secret. His unborn daughter Daenerys would be promised to the first son of Winterfell. No raven was ever sent to announce this marriage to the world. No singers sang of it, and no banners were raised. It was only known by Rhaegar, Rickard, and a handful of trusted men. But the promise was there, binding ice and fire together before either child could speak their first word. Years later, the world burned. Robert's rebellion began with whispers of Rhaegar and Lyanna Stark. The realm shook with blood and betrayal. In the end, the Targaryens fell, King's Landing burned, and baby Daenerys was smuggled across the narrow sea, too young to remember anything. The promise of betrothal became nothing more than a ghost in the north, but promises have power and oaths have long shadows. In Winterfell, Robb Stark grew under the watchful eyes of Lord Eddard and Lady Catelyn. He learned honor, duty, and the weight of being heir to the north. He never knew that across the sea, a girl with silver hair and violet eyes was meant to be his bride. Daenerys grew in exile, wandering from city to city, clinging to her brother Viserys, who fed her tales of the throne stolen from them. She was told she would one day wed Khal Drogo, or some other powerful man who could give them ships and soldiers. She was never told of the pact made by her father in his final days. Years passed and winter crept closer. Robb became a young man, proud and fair, with the Stark blood strong in him. Daenerys became a young woman, quiet yet sharp, her spirit burning brighter than her brother ever guessed. Though oceans divided them, their paths were drawn together by fate, as if Rhaegar's promise had left invisible threads pulling them closer. When Robert Baratheon rode north to Winterfell, he came not only for Eddard Stark, but also with fears in his heart. Whispers told him Daenerys Targaryen still lived. His hand clenched the hilt of his sword whenever he thought of the silver-haired child across the sea. To him, she was a threat, but to others, she was hope. It was in the quiet nights of Winterfell that Ned Stark, alone by his hearth, remembered the pact. Rhaegar's voice still echoed in his memory, speaking of songs, prophecies, and unions that could save the realm. Ned had never spoken of it to Catelyn or to his children. Yet as the cold winds howled outside and the north prepared for the dark days ahead, he wondered if the time was near. Daenerys, meanwhile, stood on a balcony in Pentos, watching the sea with longing eyes. She felt trapped under her brother's control, yet inside her burned a hunger she could not name. She did not know why her dreams were filled with wolves and snowy forests, why she sometimes saw a boy with brown hair and grey eyes standing in the mist. She thought them only dreams, but they were the whispers of a forgotten promise. And so, as the Game of Thrones began with power and betrayal, two young hearts, one in Winterfell, one across the narrow sea, were tied by an oath older than themselves. Ice waited for fire, and fire longed for ice. The question was not whether they would meet, but how many would burn before they did. The sea was restless that night, waves crashing against the docks of Pentos as if they carried secrets from across the world. Daenerys stood by the window of Illyrio Mopatis's manse, her silver hair glowing under the moonlight. She listened half-heartedly as her brother Viserys ranted about the throne, about swords and banners and vengeance. She had heard it all before. But this night was different, for Illyrio had brought a guest, a quiet, grey-haired knight with eyes that watched Daenerys with a strange weight. The knight bowed deeply when Viserys left in anger, and then, when they were alone, he spoke softly. "Princess," he said, "do you know of the pact your father made before his death?" Daenerys frowned. "Pact? My father was murdered before I was even born. What pact could there be?" The knight's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "He promised you to the son of Winterfell, to Robb Stark, heir of the North." The words struck her like a sudden storm. Daenerys felt her heart beat faster. "Robb Stark? A wolf?" She shook her head, laughing bitterly. "That is a cruel joke. My brother tells me I am meant to wed a Khal, or some merchant king who can win him ships. He has never spoken of this Stark." "Your brother would not speak of it," the knight said carefully. "But Rhaegar believed the union of ice and fire would save the realm. He trusted Lord Rickard Stark to honor it, though Robert's war ended all." Daenerys turned back to the window, staring out into the black waters. She wanted to call the knight a liar, but deep in her chest, something stirred. She thought again of her dreams, the wolf in the snow, the boy with grey eyes. Could they be more than dreams? Meanwhile, far to the north, Robb Stark was training in the courtyard of Winterfell. His sword clashed against Theon Greyjoy's with sharp steel ringing in the cold air. Arya cheered from the wallwalk, Bran clapped, and Lady Catelyn scolded them for encouraging dangerous games. But Robb fought with the seriousness of a young man preparing for war. He had his father's face when he frowned, though his laughter came quicker, warmer. That night, Ned Stark sat in his solar, looking at an old letter he had kept hidden for years. It was not written in Rhaegar's hand, but dictated to a maester who had sworn silence before dying. The letter spoke of destiny, of Daenerys' betrothal, and the song of ice and fire. Ned had never told anyone. To reveal it would risk Robert's wrath. Robert would have wanted Daenerys dead the moment he learned of her promised tie to the Starks, yet the more Ned thought of it, the heavier the secret became. Robb was nearly a man grown. Daenerys, if she lived, was a woman now. The world was changing, and winter was coming. Could it be time to speak of it, or would silence keep them safe? Across the narrow sea, Daenerys could not sleep. She lay awake, thinking of the Stark boy she had never met. Was he cruel, like Robert Baratheon who had crushed her house, or was he noble, like the old songs spoke of the North? She tried to picture him, his hair brown as earth, his eyes like the storm-grey sky. She imagined walking in forests of snow beside him. Though she had never seen snow herself, Viserys noticed her distraction. "What is wrong with you, sister?" he snapped the next morning as they dined. "You will wed Drogo soon. Forget your childish fancies." He did not know what had been told to her. Daenerys kept it hidden, the secret warming her heart like a small fire. But secrets have ways of shaping destinies. Robb, too, began to sense the weight of something unseen. One evening, when he stood on the battlements with Jon Snow, he confessed a strange feeling. "I keep dreaming of a girl, Jon. Silver hair, eyes like the sky at dusk. I do not know why." Jon laughed softly. "Perhaps the gods are telling you your bride will not be from the north." Robb smiled, but uneasily. He had always known his duty would be to wed for alliance. Yet these dreams were so vivid that he wondered if the gods themselves were whispering to him. Far to the south, Robert Baratheon feasted in King's Landing, drinking heavily and cursing the name Targaryen. "I'll see the girl dead," he growled to his council. "If she births sons, they'll claim my throne. End her before she grows wings like her father." The lords nodded, though not all agreed. Varys only smiled, hiding his knowledge of the old pact. He, too, remembered what Rhaegar had once planned. So the board was set, and the pieces began to move. In the north, a wolf dreamed of a dragon. Across the sea, a dragon dreamed of a wolf. Between them stood oceans, kings, and wars. But destiny, once promised, is hard to silence. The hall of Winterfell was warm with fire, but the air was heavy with unease. Word had reached the north, whispers carried by merchants and travelers, that Daenerys Targaryen lived, alive across the narrow sea. To some, it was only rumor, another tale for long nights. But to Ned Stark it was no surprise. He had always known. Robb listened intently as his father spoke in private, away from the others. The realm believes the Dragon Lords are gone, but one still lives. Perhaps two, her brother Viserys and his sister Daenerys. If Robert learns of this, he will want them dead. You must never speak of these names openly, Robb nodded, but he felt a strange tightening in his chest. He remembered his dreams, the silver-haired girl with violet eyes, and shivered. He wanted to ask why this girl haunted his thoughts, but Ned's face was stern, leaving no room for such questions. Meanwhile, in Pentos, Daenerys prepared for her wedding. Khal Drogo, a man tall as a tower with braids heavy with bells, had agreed to take her as wife. Viserys was nearly mad with joy. "With Drogo's army, I will take back the throne," he told anyone who would listen. But Daenerys' heart was troubled. She thought often of the knight's words, of her father's pact with the Starks. She wondered who Robb was. Was he kind, cruel, strong, or weak? She had no choice but to marry Drogo, yet deep within her, the thought of Robb Stark grew like a hidden flame. On the night before the wedding, she dreamed again. In the dream, she stood in snow, her feet cold, but her spirit strong. A wolf with grey eyes walked beside her, and when she turned, she saw a young man with a sword of ice. His breath misted in the frozen air, and he whispered her name as if he knew her. She woke with tears on her cheeks, far away. Robb woke the same night with the same dream. He had never seen the girl in life, but he knew her face more clearly than ever, silver hair like moonlight, eyes of amethyst. He told Jon again, who only shook his head in wonder. "Maybe the old gods are speaking to you," Jon said. "Or maybe your destiny lies beyond the wall of ice and snow." But destiny's pull was not limited to dreams. In King's Landing, Varys crept like a shadow through the Red Keep, whispering secrets to those who paid and those who did not. He had not told Robert of the Stark Targaryen pact. Why should he? Secrets were power, and power was his to spend when the right moment came. But he did whisper into the ears of others. Illyrio, magisters, merchants, even lords across the sea. And so the memory of Rhaegar's promise began to stir again. Ned Stark wrestled with silence. Should he tell Robb of the betrothal, of the secret oath sworn by his grandfather Rickard? To speak it aloud would be to invite danger, but to hide it forever, was that not a betrayal of Rhaegar's dying wish? Catelyn, unaware of the pact, noticed her husband's distance. She thought he carried the burden of Robert's summons to King's Landing, and in truth, that weighed on him as well. Robert would soon call him Hand of the King. The Game of Thrones would drag them all into its jaws. Daenerys, meanwhile, was wed. The Dothraki cheered as fires burned high, drums beating like thunder. Drogo was silent, a mountain of a man, while Daenerys felt like a small bird caught in the talons of a hawk. Her brother's greedy smile haunted her. Yet that night, when she looked at the moon, she thought again of the wolf. She whispered softly into the darkness, "Robb Stark, if you are real, remember me." Across the sea, in the godswood of Winterfell, Robb knelt before the heart tree. He pressed his hand to the cold roots and prayed. "If the gods mean to show me her face, then show me the path as well. If she is mine, let me not fail her." The wind blew through the leaves, and for a moment he swore he heard her whisper his name back. The pact, though hidden, was no longer sleeping. Two young hearts were awakening to its call, even as the world conspired against them. Robert Baratheon wanted her dead. Viserys wanted her sold. The Dothraki wanted her bound. Yet still, the bond stretched across sea and stone, ice and fire. Winter was coming, and with it, the storm of destiny. The Dothraki sea stretched endless under the burning sun, a land of grass where the horizon never ended. Daenerys rode beside her husband, Khal Drogo, her body aching from the pace, her heart heavy with silence. The Khalasar roared with life. Warriors shouted, horses thundered, children played in the dust. Yet Daenerys felt like a stranger among them, a small flame surrounded by a storm. But she was no longer only a frightened girl. With each passing day she grew stronger. She learned to ride, to speak in broken Dothraki, to smile when her brother hissed at her. Yet her thoughts often drifted across the sea to the boy she had never met. The knight's words echoed in her memory, promised to the son of Winterfell. Sometimes she would dream of snow falling softly around her, covering her in white. In those dreams, she was not a Khaleesi in the east, but a bride of the north, walking beside Robb Stark through the godswood of Winterfell. She would wake from those dreams with her heart pounding, torn between the life she was forced to live and the life that might have been hers. Across the narrow sea, Robb Stark stood on the training grounds of Winterfell, his sword raised against Ser Rodrik Cassel. The clang of steel rang sharp in the cold air. He fought with skill and strength, but his mind wandered. He dreamed of her again the night before, Daenerys, silver-haired and violet-eyed, standing before him as if she belonged to him. It unsettled him, made his strikes sloppy, until Ser Rodrik smacked his blade away. "Focus, Robb," the old knight barked. "A wandering mind is a dead man's mind." Robb nodded, ashamed. Yet how could he focus when the gods sent him visions of a girl he had never seen? That evening, Ned Stark called Robb to his solar. The candles flickered as the Lord of Winterfell studied his son. Finally, Ned spoke in the voice he used only when matters of honor weighed heavily. "Robb, there is something you must know. A truth I have kept too long," Robb frowned. "What truth, father?" Ned hesitated, then began. "Before the rebellion, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen made a pact with your grandfather. His unborn daughter, Daenerys, was promised to you. She was meant to be your bride." Robb froze, the breath caught in his throat. "Daenerys Targaryen," he whispered. His dreams, his visions, were they not madness but destiny? "She lives still, across the sea," Ned continued. "But this must remain secret. If Robert knew, he would have her killed. To him, she is a threat. To us, she is perhaps something else. Perhaps a promise that still matters." Robb's heart thundered. He wanted to ask 100 questions. What she looked like, what she was like, if she knew of him. But Ned's face told him the danger was too great. Meanwhile, Daenerys rode in silence as the Khalasar moved like a river of fire across the plains. Viserys sneered at her strength, angry that she began to carry herself like a Khaleesi, not a pawn. He did not know of her dreams. He did not know of the promise. But others noticed the change in her. Ser Jorah Mormont, the exiled knight, rode often at her side. "You are stronger than you know," he told her one evening. "The blood of the dragon flows in your veins. One day you will remember who you are meant to be." Daenerys looked at the horizon and whispered under her breath, "Or perhaps I will remember who I was promised to be." Back in King's Landing, Robert Baratheon slammed his fist against the council table. "The girl is married to a horse lord. Soon she'll have his army at her back. Kill her now, before she breeds more dragons." His voice boomed, and the lords shifted uncomfortably. Ned, who had come south to serve as hand, clenched his jaw. "She is only a girl, Robert. A child bride on the far side of the world." "Leave her be." Robert's face turned red with fury. "A child who will bear sons. Sons who will come for my throne. And her." But Ned held his ground. He thought of Robb, of Daenerys, of the promise. He could not let Robert's paranoia destroy the girl his son was bound to. The clash of ice and fire was not yet ready, but it would come. As the days passed, Daenerys found her strength in unexpected ways. She learned to ride better than many of Drogo's men. She held her head high as Khaleesi, and whispers spread through the Khalasar that the silver-haired bride of the Khal had the spirit of flame in her eyes. Yet in her heart she carried the memory of the wolf in the snow, and in the cold halls of Winterfell, Robb carried the memory of the dragon bride he had never met. Their bond stretched across the sea, a promise alive in both their hearts, even as the world tried to tear them apart. The Dothraki sea burned golden under the sun as Daenerys rode at the front of the Khalasar. She was no longer the timid girl who trembled under Viserys's threats. Now her back was straight, her hands firm on the reins, her violet eyes steady. Khal Drogo had given her respect. He had begun to look at her not as a burden, but as a woman of fire. The Dothraki called her Khaleesi, and for the first time in her life she felt the weight of true power. Yet in her heart, the secret of Rhaegar's pact lived like an ember. She wondered each night about Robb Stark. Did he know of her? Did he dream of her as she dreamed of him? Sometimes she thought she was mad, clinging to the words of a dying knight. But the dreams were too vivid to ignore. She saw snow, wolves, the heart tree with red leaves whispering in the cold. She heard her name on the wind. One evening, as the Khalasar camped beneath the stars, Daenerys held the 3 dragon eggs Illyrio had gifted her. She traced her fingers over their cold, rough shells and whispered to them, "If I am fire, then perhaps he is ice. If I am dragon, he is wolf." The thought made her smile faintly, though it ached deep inside her chest. In Winterfell, Robb Stark was becoming a man of decisions. Lord Eddard had gone south to serve Robert as Hand of the King, and the weight of the North fell on Robb's shoulders. He held counsel with Maester Luwin, kept peace among the bannermen, and trained harder than ever before. To the people of Winterfell, he was heir. To the men of the North, he was a young wolf. But inside, Robb carried a secret that few could imagine. Sometimes, when he stood in the Godswood at night, he whispered her name. "Daenerys," he said, the sound of it strange yet comforting. He felt her presence in his dreams, as if the gods tied them together across the sea. He had not told anyone, not Jon, not Theon, not even his mother, that his father had revealed the pact. It was too dangerous, but the knowledge burned within him like a hidden fire. Catelyn Stark noticed the change in her son. "You seem distracted, Robb," she told him one morning as they broke their fast. "You carry yourself like your father, but your eyes are far away." Robb only smiled faintly. "Perhaps the gods are trying to show me something, Mother. Perhaps my path lies beyond the North." She frowned, unsettled by his words, but said nothing more. Far to the south, in King's Landing, Ned Stark struggled against Robert's counsel. The king raged again about Daenerys, who now carried Khal Drogo's child. "A son of hers will ride with 40,000 screamers at his back." Robert thundered, "I want her dead, Ned, both her and the child." Ned's jaw tightened. "She is but a girl, Robert. To kill her in her bed, what honor is there in that?" Robert slammed his fist on the table. "Honor? What use is honor when her son comes to cut us down?" The council squabbled, but Ned stood alone in his defense. He thought of Robb, of the pact, of the girl across the sea who was meant to be part of his family. He could not allow Robert's hatred to snuff her out. He left the council chamber that day with his honor intact, but his heart heavy, for he knew the king's wrath would not fade easily. Meanwhile, in the Dothraki Sea, Viserys' desperation reached its breaking point. He demanded his crown from Drogo, demanded the army he believed was his by right. But Daenerys watched with cold eyes as her brother sealed his own doom. She did not weep when the molten gold was poured upon his head. Instead, she whispered, "He was no dragon." For the first time, she felt truly free. That night, as the campfires burned and Drogo's people sang, Daenerys felt a shift within her. She placed her hand on her belly, knowing now she carried a child of her own. Her lips parted in a faint smile. "The stallion who mounts the world," the Dothraki called him. But in her heart, she thought of the pact, of Robb Stark. What would he think of her, a Khaleesi with fire in her blood? And across the sea, Robb Stark woke with a start, as if he had heard her heartbeat echoing in the silence of the night. He sat in his chamber, staring at the fire, feeling a bond he could not name. It was as if their lives moved like 2 rivers, far apart, but destined to meet at the same sea. Winter was creeping closer. The Game of Thrones grew bloodier. And between it all, the wolf and the dragon, bound by an old promise, drew ever nearer to their fate. The drums of war beat louder with each passing moon. In the east, Daenerys Targaryen had begun to command not only respect, but awe. The Khaleesi walked among her people with a quiet strength that startled even seasoned warriors. She fed the hungry, listened to the widows, and soothed the children who cried in the night. The Dothraki whispered that she was not only a Khaleesi, but something more, a woman touched by the gods, a dragon in mortal flesh. Her belly had begun to swell with child, and the women around her touched her gently, whispering of prophecy. The stallion who mounts the world, they called her unborn son. Khal Drogo boasted that no man would stand against the boy. Yet when Daenerys lay awake at night, her hand on her stomach, she thought of two destinies, the one the Dothraki claimed and the one her father had promised. Would her child be wolf or dragon, or something greater still, a song of both? Far to the west, in Winterfell, Robb Stark was no longer dreaming only of silver hair and violet eyes. War was on the horizon. The Raven came with dark tidings. Lord Eddard had been arrested in King's Landing. The realm was breaking into pieces, and the lords of the north called their banners. In the great hall, Robb sat at the high seat for the first time, the carved direwolf looming above him. His voice was steady, though inside he trembled. "The Lannisters have dishonored my father. They hold him prisoner in the Red Keep. We will march south, and the north will show its teeth." The hall erupted with cheers of fierce loyalty. But when the crowd dispersed, Robb sat alone, his hands gripping the armrests. He thought of his father's secret, of Daenerys, of the pact. Could he march into war while bound by a promise to a girl across the sea? Or was that promise the very key to the future? Jon Snow found him brooding that night in the Godswood. "You are afraid," Jon said quietly, "not as an insult but as truth." "I'm not afraid of battle," Robb admitted. "I am afraid of what lies beyond it. My father spoke of a girl who may be mine by oath, yet I know her not. And now the realm calls me to war. Which destiny is truly mine, Jon? The one with sword and shield, or the one with her?" Jon smiled faintly. "Perhaps they are not two destinies. Perhaps they are one." Robb fell silent, haunted by the thought. In the Dothraki Sea, Daenerys began to dream more vividly than ever. She dreamed of wolves running beside her, of snow falling gently on her shoulders, of a man with grey eyes watching her, as if she were his only truth. Sometimes she woke with his name on her lips, though she had never spoken it aloud to anyone but herself. Her strength grew, but so did her doubts. Drogo was powerful, yet his ambitions stretched only as far as conquest. Viserys had been a fool, but perhaps not wrong about one thing. The Iron Throne still existed, and her blood gave her claim. What role, then, would Robb Stark play? Would he stand beside her as her ally, or would he become her enemy when their paths crossed? In King's Landing, Ned Stark languished in the black cells, his thoughts heavy with regret. He prayed not for himself, but for Robb and Daenerys. "Keep them safe," he whispered to the gods, "for their union may yet save this realm." He thought of Rhaegar's solemn face the day the pact was made, and he wondered if the prince's visions had been true. But Robert Baratheon was dead, gored by a boar, and the throne now stood vulnerable. War erupted like wildfire across Westeros, Stark against Lannister, Baratheon against Baratheon. Amidst it all, whispers of Daenerys spread further. Spies carried word that the silver-haired Khaleesi bore a child of Drogo's blood. Some feared her, others prayed for her return. Few knew of the pact, but the idea of wolf and dragon united still stirred quietly in shadows. Robb led his banners south, his direwolf Grey Wind at his side. He was young, but his eyes had hardened with resolve. At night in his tent, when sleep finally came, he saw her again, Daenerys standing in fire, holding a child in her arms. She looked at him not with fear, but with a strange kind of trust, as though she had always known him. And in the Dothraki Sea, Daenerys dreamed of a young man standing on a battlefield of snow and steel, his direwolf howling at his side. She felt no fear, only the pull of destiny. 2 paths, 2 wars, 2 lives, one in fire, one in ice. The promise of their fathers was awakening, stronger now than ever before. The world burned, and winter drew near. The wolf and the dragon, though still apart, were no longer only dreaming. They were preparing. The Dothraki Sea was silent after Drogo's fall. What had once been a roaring tide of horsemen scattered like leaves in the wind. Khal Drogo, undefeated and feared, now lay cold in the dust, his great braid cut, his body burned. Daenerys sat beside the pyre long after the embers died, her face streaked with ash and tears. She had lost her husband, her child, and the future the Dothraki had promised her. Yet in her grief, she was reborn. The night she walked into the flames, clutching her dragon eggs, was the night her destiny changed. When the fire cleared, she stood unburnt. 3 small dragons coiled against her skin. Their cries pierced the sky, sharp and wild, and the world gasped at the impossible. Daenerys Stormborn was no longer just a Khaleesi. She was mother of dragons. Her people bowed before her, their eyes wide with fear and awe. Daenerys lifted her chin, her silver hair shimmering in the dawn. For the first time she felt the truth of her blood. She was Targaryen. She was fire. And the pact of ice and fire, long forgotten by the world, whispered louder in her heart. Across the narrow sea, the north bled. Robb Stark led his men with the fury of a young wolf, his direwolf grey wind tearing through the enemy like a storm. Victory after victory carried his name across the realm. At the Green Fork, at the Whispering Wood, the boy proved himself a commander, a leader. The lords of the north gathered in a great tent, and with swords raised they cried, "The king in the north!" Robb accepted their voices, but in the quiet of night his thoughts returned to her. When the crown was placed upon his brow, he felt not only the weight of the north, but the pull of destiny. He thought of Daenerys across the sea, carrying dragons or perhaps children, perhaps both. He did not know what she had become, but he knew she was not gone. Catelyn wept with pride and fear. "You are young for such a crown," she told him, "but the men believe in you. Do not let them down." "I will not," Robb promised. Yet even as he swore it, his dreams betrayed him again. He saw her in firelight, dragons curled around her shoulders, her eyes fixed upon him. She did not look like a bride now, she looked like a queen. Back in Essos, Daenerys nursed her dragons, tiny yet fierce. They fed on charred meat and coals, their scales glowing faintly in the fire. Each time one curled against her, she felt the bond strengthen, as if her soul was tied to theirs. So Jorah bowed before her, swearing his loyalty. "The world will hear of this," he said. "They will come to fear you." Daenerys smiled faintly. "Let them fear, but let them also remember that I was promised once before all this. My father saw something in me and in another. A wolf of the north." Jorah frowned but said nothing. He thought it folly, some dream born of grief. But Daenerys believed. In King's Landing, the realm tore itself apart. King Robert was dead. The Lannisters tightened their grip, and Joffrey Baratheon sat upon the throne with cruelty dripping from his every word. Sansa Stark was a hostage, Arya vanished, and Ned Stark's head had fallen before the sept of Baelor. The North's fury shook the 7 kingdoms. And yet, in the Red Keep, whispers spread of Daenerys and her dragons. Varys listened carefully. To one lord he whispered of fire, to another of wolves. He alone knew of the pact, and in his spider's mind he began to weave. What if the wolf and the dragon did meet? What if ice and fire, bound by old oaths, rose together? It could break the realm, or save it. Robb marched through the riverlands, his crown heavy, but his will unbroken. One night by the campfire he confessed to Theon, "I keep seeing her, Daenerys. I thought it was madness, but now I think it is something more," Theon laughed. "Dreaming of silver-haired girls when you've got a war to fight? You're truly a Stark." But Robb only stared into the flames, silent. Daenerys, far away, stared into her own fire that same night, her dragons hissing softly at her feet. She whispered into the flames, "Robb Stark, Wolf of the North. King now, they say. Are you dreaming of me as I dream of you?" And though oceans divided them, though war raged around them, it seemed for a heartbeat their voices crossed the void, carried on the breath of fire and the chill of ice. The wolf had risen as king, the dragon had risen as mother. Their paths were no longer drifting, they were rushing toward collision. The winds of destiny howled across 2 continents. In the east, Daenerys Targaryen stood taller than she ever had before. She was no longer a frightened girl, no longer just a widow of the Dothraki. She was the mother of dragons, a queen with fire in her veins and fire at her command. Each day her dragons grew stronger, their cries sharper, their wings broader. People began to gather around her, outcasts, slaves, and men who dreamed of freedom. Her strength was becoming a beacon, but even as she dreamed of the Iron Throne, her thoughts never left the north. The pact of her father weighed on her like an unspoken vow. She would touch the shells of her dragons at night and whisper, "Ice and fire, wolf and dragon." Sometimes she felt Robb Stark's presence so close, she thought if she stretched out her hand, she would touch him. In the west, Robb Stark marched with the north at his back. He had been crowned king in the north, yet each victory only seemed to bring greater loss. The riverlands burned, the Lannisters struck back, and betrayal lay like a shadow over every camp. Yet in the midst of war, he held on to his father's words. "She was promised to you." Robb dreamed of Daenerys constantly now, but the dreams no longer showed only fire and snow. He saw her with dragons circling above her, their roars shaking the earth. He saw her crowned not as his bride, but as his equal, and sometimes he feared what it meant. Could the wolf and the dragon truly stand together, or would they destroy each other? Far in King's Landing, Varys whispered in dark chambers. "The north has crowned a king," he said to Illyrio's messengers. "The east has birthed dragons. Perhaps the realm's salvation lies not in one, but in both. Ice and fire, fire and ice." His words were carried across the sea, reaching ears that mattered. It was in Korth, beyond the Red Waste, where Daenerys first heard Robb's name spoken aloud by a stranger. A merchant with pale eyes told her, "The north has broken from the 7 kingdoms. They call him king in the north, Robb Stark." Daenerys' heart stopped. She whispered his name under her breath, as if tasting it for the first time in truth. Robb. That night she dreamed not of fire but of snow. In the dream she stood in the Godswood of Winterfell, and Robb stood before her, his direwolf at his side. He reached out his hand, and when she touched it, the snow and fire swirled together, blazing into light. Far away, Robb dreamed the same. He woke with grey wind howling outside his tent, the night air cold and sharp. He pressed his hand to his chest and whispered, "Daenerys." The war in Westeros deepened. The Freys grew restless, the Lannisters schemed, and Robb felt the weight of every choice pressing down upon him. He wanted to honor the pact, but he also needed alliances in the present. Every lord demanded marriages, treaties, bonds, sealed in blood. Yet each time another house offered him their daughters, he refused. His bannermen muttered that their king was too proud, too stubborn. But Robb knew the truth. He was already bound. Daenerys, too, felt the tug of choices. She could stay in Korth and grow strong, or she could sail west with her dragons. Jorah urged her to think carefully, to take what strength she could before risking all. Yet Daenerys felt the pull of destiny, like a chain around her heart. "The wolf waits," she whispered one night, "and winter is coming. I must not be late." And so, though oceans still lay between them, the path forward began to sharpen. Rumors of Robb Stark reached her more and more. Stories of the young wolf who never lost a battle, who led his men with both honor and fury. To her, he was no longer a dream. He was real. And for Robb, the silver-haired queen with dragons was no longer just a vision of sleep. She was alive, rising, and soon she would come. The world around them burned, kings fell, houses betrayed, swords clashed. But beneath all of it, older than war and stronger than crowns, the pact of Rhaegar lived, wolf and dragon, ice and fire. Their meeting was not a question of if, but of when. And when it came, the realm would tremble. For together they could save it, or together they could burn it to ash. The Game of Thrones raged on, but somewhere in the quiet of dreams, Daenerys and Robb stood face to face. Two halves of a song the world had long forgotten, and soon the song would be sung.